Morning. So if you're like me, you are probably up to your eyeballs in political ads right now. And it's probably the last thing you want to hear about, but I think there's something important here that needs to be discussed. So when I say up to my eyeballs in political ads, like it is astounding how like just flooded the media market is on one side of the aisle in this state. Like I can tell you very clearly who the candidates in my area are, like Tina Kotek and Neil Gupta and Carrick Flynn. My God, Carrick Flynn. Every time I turn on YouTube or any other media outlet, every time I open my mailbox, half the robocalls I get are Carrick Flynn for Congress, I guess. Like I tune it out every time I hear it, but goddamn if I don't know his name, especially with him. Like apparently all the money for this, like, because he's from Vernonia or something, but he's got some major backing from the Bay Area and tech giants or something like that. I could be wrong about that. I seem to recall hearing that. But I mean, like for the first couple months, I started seeing, and it's been months. For the first couple months, I've been seeing his ads. Like he didn't even talk in his ads. Like it's just kind of this montage of him walking around doing, you know, candidate-y things, talking to people, and sleeves rolled up, looking like he's, you know, hardworking, blue-collar feller. But he didn't even say anything in his commercials, like, for the first couple months. And, like, he's got a little bit of a blurb now, and he just sounds like an asshole. And I'm probably horribly biased now because I'm just so irritated by the quantity of advertising that I received for Mr. Flynn. And one call I got, it wasn't even a robocall. It was just it was a person calling, like, you know, canvassing on the phone. It was like, hey, you know, I'd like to talk to you about Carrick Flynn. And I'm like, oh, really? Yeah, let's talk about Carrick Flynn. You tell Carrick I will not be voting for him purely because of the quantity of BS that has been pouring out of every media orifice for the last couple of months. Screw him. You can tell him that from me. I should be nicer. I mean, this is just a hardworking guy, but I was irritated. Like, I mean, that day, like, I mean, literally, I got to the point where, like, I was just like closing YouTube and then reopening it, and I would watch any other commercial as long as it wasn't a Carrick Flynn one. And now, like, if I close it and reopen the app, it just cycles through every single political ad. I don't know if they're targeted, because I look at and think about and talk about political stuff, or I've, you know, answered you know, surveys on the phone when pollsters call. You know, I've tried to, when I can, take time to actually answer polls, because the sample size on them is actually pretty small, and so your opinion on those actually matters and will be proportionately much more reflected in an opinion poll than, say, like in an actual election. So if you care about something and you want that reflected in kind of the popular awareness, you really should take the time. But maybe that's why I get bombarded. I don't know. I've heard that people who donate any amount of money to campaign get absolutely inundated with you know, people hitting them up for money because they do that. So maybe I bring some of it upon myself, but I'd be curious to know if you're getting absolutely bombarded. So, and what the thing about that, right? Like, I mean, it's just like, I have no idea who any Republicans are in Oregon who are running, with a few exceptions. Like, I mean, I've seen a couple ads for Bob Tiernan for governor, and that's a governor's race, right? But I mean, local stuff, I don't know. You know, and granted, we haven't even gotten through the primary. The primary's in a couple days, so if you haven't voted already, you know, go find your ballot, do a little research, take a little time. No matter which primary you're voting in, if you're voting in a primary. But I mean, yeah, it's just, it is astounding, like, how much money has been pumped into Democrat campaigns already, and we're not even through the primary, to the point where I can tell you their names. You know, I may not know exactly what they're running for. Obviously, like, I mean, you know, there's some kind of geofencing with how they're targeting these ads now, and these are people that, you know, I'm in the area, I operate in the area that they're running, right? But the one that really irks me is the Washington County DA race. And for those of you who don't know, this is now the second contested race for DA, which is fine. If somebody wants to run for DA, go for it. But so 4 years ago, Kevin Barton was running for his first term. Kevin Barton is, you know, somebody who came up through the DA's office. He has a good working relationship with local law enforcement. He is local. He ran nonpartisan, which, God, the district attorney should be a nonpartisan position, at least nominally. I mean, people are who they are, right? And, you know, they shouldn't have to tiptoe about what their politics are, but at least nominally, like, the person tasked with prosecuting crimes in your county, who has, by the way, something called unlimited immunity. Okay, people complain about qualified immunity for law enforcement officers, right? And that's for, you know, civil stuff. But district attorneys have unlimited immunity. So you can Google what the difference is, but I mean, they have an enormous amount of leeway to prompt investigations and prosecute cases as they see fit. And so you want somebody nonpartisan in there, no matter what your political bent is. Because, you know, to an extent, like your sheriff, your district attorney are the highest level elected law enforcement in your state, except for maybe like the state attorney general, right? And you know, they need to be accountable to and you know, fairly represent everybody in the county. And you don't want those highest level law enforcement officials enforcing anybody's particular political bent at the barrel of a gun, which I know I've talked about several times. So the first time Kevin Barton ran, nonpartisan, right? He's local, he understands the district attorney's office, and he's run against somebody 4 years ago named Max Wall. And there was just an enormous amount of money for a local district attorney's race that got dumped into this, mostly prompted by Wall. And Barton had to go out and find donors to match to compete against basically big George Soros bucks. Now, people hear George Soros and immediately tune it out, right? Yeah, conspiracy theorist. Disregard anything coming after the name George Soros. But George Soros is a billionaire. He does throw a lot of money around, and he did basically buy a number of DAs across the country to push a particular political agenda. For example, Mike Schmidt in Multnomah County. So, at the same time that Mike Schmidt was running, Max Wall was running. And this was a targeted effort, again, across the country. And we saw the results of it in the years following, right? I mean, if you are pleased with how the laws are now being enforced in Multnomah County, then you would have probably been quite happy with the performance of Max Wall had he been elected. He was not, fortunately for Washington County. You know, and people in Washington County, I have observed comments on law enforcement stories and things that occur within Washington County, like the fact that they are not Multnomah County, like the fact that the county is not run, that the laws in the county are not enforced the way they are in Multnomah County, under people like Mike Schmidt, or other well-known Portland politicians like Ted Wheeler, you know, or other county commissioners in Portland. And so here we are again, where this guy Brian Decker is again challenging Kevin Barton for the DA's position in Washington County. And it should be a nonpartisan race, right? I firmly believe that. But you see, you know, signage for Brian Decker, it's Democrat for Washington County TA. And again, and this time, like Max Wall, like it played it pretty close to the vest 4 years ago, and denied that he was getting Soros funding until after the campaign, when it came out, was like, yeah, he got a lot of money from Soros. This time, Brian Decker has not been able to conceal the fact that he's gotten money from organizations that are funded by Decker, funded by Soros, on which Soros sits on the board. Okay, and I'll link to a local news story that talks about that. Okay, so I'm not making this up. This is not a conspiracy theory. You can say what you want about George Soros. He is a political animal, right? And he is, for some reason, highly interested in district attorneys' races across the country. And this organization that sent money to Mike Schmidt, to Max Wall, to Brian Decker, is a drug policy political, you know, action group, or whatever they're called, that's basically pushing for, you know, broad decriminalization of hard drugs. Now, from a liberty standpoint, I am not unsympathetic to the argument that what people put in their body is kind of their own business, right? You know, if people want to, for example, smoke marijuana, that's really their business. And I fully expect that in the next decade, we'll see marijuana become decriminalized federally. I think that's going to happen. But when you talk about hard drugs, okay, when we talk about methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl, okay, A, extraordinarily dangerous, B, extraordinarily addictive, right? So, I mean, I'm not aware of anybody that's died of a cannabis overdose, okay? Fentanyl kills a lot of people, and the numbers have been rising in the last few years, okay? So that's number one. Number two, the highly addictive part, okay? People who are addicted to heroin, methamphetamine, so it's stimulants, opiates, central nervous system depressants, you know, they will do almost anything to avoid withdrawals. And there are all kinds of programs out there to help them get off of drugs and supply them with things like, you know, Suboxone. But in my experience, Suboxone gets collected and sold as something to take the edge off your cravings while you go and seek out more of whatever you're addicted to, because it doesn't give you the same high, right? So while those are valuable programs, because people do need something to safely come off of drugs, they also need accountability. So the same group that funded Mike Schmidt, that's funding Brian Decker to run against the Washington County District Attorney, Kevin Barton, the incumbent, has also spent a lot of money and effort into getting Measure 110 passed in Oregon a couple of years ago, which is what decriminalized possession, lower level possession of hard drugs, right? So now instead of a felony to possess a few grams of methamphetamine, it is now a newly created E violation, right? So driving while suspended is an A violation, right? $465, right? It used to be the lowest level violation was a D violation, $115. And that was for something like failed to use your turn signal. And now there is a Class E violation that created just for possession of hard drugs. And so the state's now telling law enforcement officers, you know, go issue soccer mom a $265 B violation for rolling a stop sign, and drug offenders who are in possession of usable quantities of hard drugs, $90 ticket that they don't have to pay, with the suggestion that they get into treatment. And 110 was billed and sold as a means to, you know, redirect efforts, resources into treatment. It's not worked that way. And if you read the text of the bill, beyond just the headline and the, you know, empathetic feel that it gave you, you realize that there are no teeth to 110. The state has no means to hold people accountable, to compel them into treatment, or to hold them accountable when they flake out on going to treatment, right? And that's the thing, right, with addicts, is that if you don't make them get off of drugs, they're not going to get off drugs because they're addicted to drugs. Now, there are some people who hit rock bottom and find it somewhere deep within themselves, a wherewithal to get themselves off drugs, but this is a rare person, right? And I'm all for treating addicted people like victims rather than criminals, right? And they are victims of, you know, the drug cartels, victims of addiction, victims of their own poor decision making, sure, but victims who need help, right? But the nexus of things that intertwines with addiction, right? The violent crime, the property crime that goes with the manufacture, distribution, possession, and use of hard drugs affects more people than just the people ingesting it, right? It affects children, okay? I have arrested a number of children who were in possession of controlled substances and driving high, okay? It was just a few weeks ago, some kids plowed into a patrol car, and a couple of them died, and, you know, suspected, unconfirmed at this point, that they were high. All sorts of rumors still swirling about that. Apparently the investigation is still ongoing. I don't have any direct knowledge of this, but that is the rumor, right? And I mean, would that really surprise anybody, right? And even if it was just marijuana. But again, I personally arrested teens in possession of and high on things besides marijuana. So it affects people beyond just the end user, right? And so again, I've talked about this kind of toxic empathy, right? That we don't want to treat people like criminals. We want to, you know, help them and be understanding of them, and, you know, do nice things for them, not be mean and put them in jail. But you're enabling bad behavior, right? And if you enable bad behavior, you have your incentives misaligned, and you will get more of the thing you want to avoid. And the truly compassionate, the truly empathetic thing is to hold people accountable, okay? There is no accountability, okay? If there are no guardrails, okay, then people will engage in self-destructive behavior. And there will be nothing to mitigate that behavior. There will be nothing to redirect and correct that behavior. And prior to 110, there were things called drug courts. There were arrests made, people filtered into drug court, and given options to seek treatment rather than criminal punishment. Okay, and of course, a large number of them flaked out, right? They didn't follow through. And so there had to be consequences for not following through on your treatment plan when you go through drug court. There has to be consequences, right? Because if there isn't, there is no incentive, right? Now, I mean, getting well should be an incentive on their own, but people in the throes of addiction do not think that way, right? They are far more afraid of the pain of coming off the drugs than they are of, a fine, okay? But if they don't have a choice, like if they're going to come down off of these drugs and get clean, either A, voluntarily, or B, while in custody, then they would probably prefer to do it voluntarily, right? And that's the whole idea there. So the people funding that, right? This drug policy organization, George Soros, people funding people like Max Wall and Mike Schmidt and Brian Decker for DA, want those sorts of things for our county, right? Or your county, or, wherever you live in Oregon, right? Those things, if they aren't already where you live, they are coming. And it is incredibly frustrating to see, again, something that should be nonpartisan, overridden and turned into a partisan issue. And that seems to be the case throughout Oregon. But something people don't realize, and it's not widely known, is that the largest segment of voters in Oregon, it's not Democrats, it's certainly not Republicans, but it's unaligned voters, unaffiliated voters, right? They are the largest single block. And so Oregon, hypothetically, could swing either way, but there's this infrastructure built up around the Democrats that precludes Republicans from getting motivated, organized enough to push back, right? And so we have a supermajority in Salem for the Democrats, right? They can just kind of push through whatever they want. And people whined and moaned and bellyached about Republicans, walking out and leaving the state and denying a quorum. And I understand the frustration, and it's funny because in states where that's the reverse, I mean, Democrats have done the same, and Republicans make the same arguments that Democrats in Oregon do, that, well, you need to do your job, and, this is what you were hired to do, and, people should be arrested for, not showing up, or should be, impeached or removed from office. Like, it's funny when it's working against you that it's a problem, right? And so I understand the frustration, but in a pluralistic society, right, where we have multiple perspectives and at least two functional political parties that are supposed to work cooperatively, if you can't even reach a quorum, right, with a supermajority, because your policies are that extreme, and the opposition, that is the only avenue to resist, what does that say about your policy, right? If you really represent a significant majority of the state, it should be policies that are being presented that have broad support, and it would be difficult for the opposition to use some kind of nuclear option, right, like that. But I think the Democratic supermajority in Salem has not served Oregon well. Again, if you're happy with how things are working in Portland, then, maybe you'd be happy with Brian Decker as your DA. But, look into it. I'm not telling anybody how to vote, so much as raising the issue. Obviously my feelings on the subject are clear. But, look into your local races, you know, and find out what's going on. I've already voted and sent in my ballot. I did the best I could to do my due diligence, looking at it. I changed my registration this year from Democrat to Republican, primarily because I wanted to vote for my dad in the primary. And so if you live in Sherwood, in parts of Newburgh or King City, Bull Mountain, you know, southern Beaverton, Hillsborough, there's that whole area is House District 26. Find out which House District you're in, but my dad's running in the Republican primary. So if you're a Republican and you're going to vote in the primary and you live in that area, please consider checking the box for Glenn Lancaster, because I think he will. If he runs against Courtney Neuron, who's the current incumbent, I think he can win. I think there's been a big shift in the national political environment. And I think there is a genuine opportunity to break the supermajority in Salem, which I think would be a good thing for everyone, even if you're a Democrat. I don't think Democrats have done anything useful with the overriding and significant amount of power that they have. And they need some kind of check and balance against them. You know, and I was hesitant to change my registration. But like I said, I wanted to vote for my dad in the primary. I don't know if I would be registered as a Republican otherwise. I would probably be one of those unaffiliated voters if I changed my registration. You know, and maybe I'm part of the problem for staying registered as a Democrat for so long. But I mean, really, that's kind of where the politics is in Oregon, right? And if you want to actually influence who's going to end up in office, I mean, the primaries and the Democratic primary are actually kind of more important than the general election a lot of times. This go around, I think that's not true. And so, you know, whether you're registered with one of the major parties or you're unaffiliated, please vote. And like I said, the primary is in a couple days. It's on the 17th. So, you know, get out and vote. Fill out your ballot. Make sure you drop it off at a drop box. I wouldn't even send it through the mail. I would make sure it gets delivered by hand. There's lots of places you can drop them off, like, you know, any kind of public facility. But yeah, please vote. Please be an informed voter. Learn what you can. Don't just sign off on things that sound good in the title. Like, do a little research, because if you don't know what you're actually voting for, you get things like 110, which has just been an absolute disaster. Yeah, so it's been fun, inspiring, and uplifting as always. We'll see you on the next one.